I'm Matt Hartsky with Backbone Unlimited, and in today's episode, we're diving into something that's invisible, but it's the difference between punching a tag and going home with nothing. We're talking about the wind, and more specifically, thermals, and how to read, predict, and use them when you're mountain hunting. It doesn't matter how good your call is, how sharp your broadhead is, or how many trail cams you've run. If the wind isn't right, the game is over before it begins. Now, let's break it down. What wind and thermals really are. Let's define this up front. Wind is the prevailing air movement, usually stronger, horizontal, and influenced by weather systems. Thermals are vertical air movements caused by temperature differences, mostly driven by sunlight, elevation, and terrain. On a basic level, cool air sinks, warm air rises. In the mountains, terrain thermals are happening every single day on every single slope. For example, in the morning, cold air sinks down drainages equals downhill thermals. As the sun hits a slope, starts to warm things up, that warm air is going to cause an upslope thermal, okay? Rising air thermals. Now, as cloud cover returns, thermals stall or they can swirl. How thermals work hour by hour, let's walk through a typical backcountry hunting day and see how thermals change. Let's talk about like 4:30 a.m. in the morning till maybe 7:30 a.m. and there's no hard and fast rule on this upper end here, but let's just say in general your morning hunt is 4:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. The cold air is generally sinking at that time. Before sunrise, cool air is going to flow downhill. Thermals are strong and consistent, flowing down ridges, cuts, and draws. Best timing for a stalk and calling from below. Now that 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. period, if you're still out there, that's going to be a transition time. The sun heats the slopes, the thermals begin to rise. You got to be careful. Shaded areas may still pull cold air down. But this is the most unpredictable time. It's the most unpredictable window. You know, the air is going to swirl. You've got eddies. It's instability in the thermals there. From 11:30 a.m. until 4 p.m., you're going to start to have a pretty constant uphill flow for the most part. Warm air is rising consistently. It's the best time for approaching from above as scent rises up and away from animals. So if you're putting on stalks, you're generally going to be approaching those stalks from above. The caveat is, where are elk going to be bedded? They're going to be bedded in the shade, in the thick stuff, and a lot of times those deep shady areas, they can throw those thermals off and you can have, again, stalled thermals there, so still constantly have to monitor the wind. Now this upper range, again, no hard and fast rule for when it starts, but from around 4 p.m. until sunsets, that air at some point is going to start to sink there. I've blown this part more than any other thermal area of the day. I can remember calling in a really nice bull. We were sitting on a shaded north-facing slope that it was kind of bridging the gap between bedding and transition areas. And we started out at 4 o'clock and we were just cold calling, just something for me to do with the boys, you know, get them out there. They were antsy at camp. They were ready to get hunting. And we started calling, and I started off with some cow calls, and every 20 to 30 minutes I'd let off a whiny weak bugle, just cold calling, seeing if we were catching anything, moving around, get something fired up. And then out of the blue, from one of those cow sequences that led into a little bugle, I had a bull just fire off probably 100 yards below us, and he was coming, and he was just crashing up. And I had my boys down below thinking that, you know, the bull was going to come from below us where we were set up. And when he came out into the area where they could shoot at him, they were describing big old rack, you know, with polished white tips coming out of the trees. And boy, as soon as he hit the first opening, hit the brakes, nose was up in the air, and lickety-split, he was gone. And, you know, I just sat there in that spot too long, and the thermals had shifted right at that time. And I can even remember thinking, after I heard him scream the first time and heard him crashing, that first little bit of cold air on the back of my neck. And any experienced hunter will tell you that wind on the back of the neck when your quarry is in front of you is a bad sign. You get a sinking feeling real quick when that happens. So for those evening hunts, just be prepared that, you know, you might be good at 4, you might be good at 5, you might be good at 6, but somewhere in there, those thermals are going to start changing, and that wind's going to start coming back and falling down drainages again. And one other tip to mention, just be aware of the sun angle, right, and the type of slope that you're on. Just like the reason why in the springtime, a lot of times those bulls are feeding out there on the south-facing slopes, and a lot of times that's where you'll find sheds. It's just those south-facing slopes are going to hold more heat longer, and so you have to be aware that that holds true of those thermals as well. So south-facing slopes are going to hold those thermal patterns longer. North-facing slopes are going to find those heat and cold changes earlier or later in the day, depending on whether you're hunting morning or evening. Let's talk about how we can combine our knowledge of the wind and the thermals with terrain to really evaluate our hunt plan. Thermals don't just happen in a vacuum, right? They interact with the terrain. So let's look at some terrain features and how they affect air movement. So some of the key terrain effects are ridges. The wind usually hits those, and a lot of times it splits. And so those thermals like rise midday, approach from the shaded side early on. Yeah, basins, they can trap the scent in a bowl, and thermals can swirl, especially on still days. So if you got animals bedded in basins, just be aware that that wind checker is going to be out an awful lot, checking that swirling wind. In drainages, they're major scent highways, right? Usually those thermals and wind are a little more predictable, but at the same time, they can be really strong. So you just got to keep an eye on where you're approaching from. Now, benches as well, they can be shaded areas, and those thermals can hold longer in some of those shaded areas as well. So bulls love to bed on those benches, but just something to be aware of, that when you're in that thick tree cover, those thermals can hold longer. So as far as a mapping strategy goes, study your hunt area and map your expected thermal patterns throughout the day. So now that you're looking at the benches, you're looking at the ridges, you're looking at drainages, also build your hunt plans based around your scent profile, not just where you think that the elk are going to be. How do we hunt into the wind? Because you can't beat the wind, but you can work with it. Here's how to turn invisible air into your biggest hunting ally. These are actionable tactics. Start below them in the morning. Use downhill thermals to your advantage. Circle wide, even if it adds on an hour. It's way better to burn those calories than blow the stock. Give yourself more room than you think that you might need on the stock. Test often. That means get that puffer out. Test that smoke all the time. Every 50 yards probably isn't too often. We talk, when we get into talking about still hunting, one of the rules of thumb on still hunting that my dad tried to pound into me early on was, don't rush it. You can't take too few steps. Some folks recommend taking 5 steps and looking, glassing, watching, listening. Some folks say, 3 is probably a better number. Take a few steps. Walk, look, listen. You have a much better chance of seeing animals before they see you. And the same is true of testing that wind out there. Try to get into the habit of using it often. Now, if you're going to set up, it's better to set up crosswind if you can't get perfect wind, but never tailwind. Again, wind on the neck, bad sign, I would say almost every time, right? There may be some fluke occasion where somehow that works out, or maybe it's hitting you in the neck here, but between you and the animal, maybe there's a crosswind. But the general rule of thumb is set up crosswind if you can't get it right versus feeling it on your neck ahead of time. And make sure that you're adjusting as the sun moves. What worked at 9 a.m. is going to betray you at noon. Early on, I was really stubborn about this, and sometimes it's just really hard to walk away from a close stock because the wind's bad. But that's discipline of the hunt, right? And that's the difference between another failed hunt and a freezer full of meat. Every decision you make should answer one question: where is my scent going right now? If you want to get better at hunting the mountains, stop thinking about your calling or obsessing about your gear and start paying attention to that airflow. Can't tell you how important it is. Mastering thermals and wind isn't optional. It's the difference between success and failure. So start training your brain like a weatherman. Use maps, use the sun, use the terrain, and use your legs to make the right approach, even if it's the harder one. If this episode helped you, please drop a comment with your biggest wind-related mistake or tip that you've learned. I read them all, and I would appreciate passing them on if you've learned something that I didn't mention. And if you want to show that you live this life for real, please check out backboneunlimited.com for gear and mindset that backs it all up. Hunt hard, hunt into the wind, never settle.